It's Bickles and welcome back to Dead by Daylight. In today's video I wanted to go over some tips and tricks and things that I learned while top ranking the Trapper. Before anything else, I have something a bit controversial I'd like to talk about, and that's the fact that I think Corrupt Intervention is probably one of the worst perks you can run on the Trapper. And here's why. When playing the Trapper, you need setup time. So if the three farthest gens from you are being blocked, survivors are being pushed towards you, and one of two things are going to happen. A survivor will follow you around and snap your traps as you play, and ultimately almost doubling your setup time because you'll have to go back around and reset up traps. Or you have to stop what you're doing and chase the survivor and either get an early down and lose your Corrupt Intervention and get through setup without it, or in worst case scenario get looped for a little while as just an M1 killer. Now that I've got that out of the way, I would like to talk about how the Trapper is typically played. There are two ways the Trapper is typically played. The first is a basement Trapper, super straightforward, run a backpack build of some sort, something along these lines. Iron Grasp, Agitation, Mad Grit, and Monstrous Shrine. I also like to run the Trapper Sack and a makeshift wrap. This way you have all of your traps and you do not get stunned if you walk through them. When playing Basement Trapper, typically the first thing you want to do when you load into a match is look for the basement hooks. Once you find them, you're going to want to try to push somebody over into that direction and down them over there. Once you get them down, hook them in the basement and trap the hell out of the basement area. And if it happens to be at Killer Shack or another strong loop around it, make sure to trap those as well. Now for this build with the Monstrous Shrine, you do want to leave and hope that they get stuck in a trap on the way out. Then you'll just rinse and repeat until you have the 4K. The second most common way to play Trapper is a 3-gen Trapper. Now when playing the 3-gen Trapper, the process is also fairly straightforward. You can use pretty much any build that you want, but I will recommend one later on in the video. The general idea once you load into the map is to use all of your traps in one general area centered around a 3-gen. Most of the time when I play, I try to put traps around tiles that they cannot burn up. Things like double window loops, Killer Shack, windows. Because what will happen is once you get your 3-gen set up and you push survivors closer to your 3-gen and closer to your traps, you can keep pressure on your 3-gen, stopping that last one from popping. And as you push survivors off the generators, they're going to run to tiles that are really super easy to get rid of. Things like trash pallets or just super simple pallet loops. They'll throw that pallet, you break it, and eventually what's going to happen is they do not have anything left to run around, or their only other option is to run into your traps. This here will allow you to get a lot of quick downs in late game, allowing you to ultimately get a 3K with maybe one person out through hatch, or a 4K. Now on to perks. There are many builds that I tried playing while I was trying to top tier the Trapper. But the build that I would say helped me the most and was the most consistent was Jolt, Pain Resonance, Fearmonger, and Iron Grasp. Now of course you could swap out Iron Grasp for whatever you would like. It was just to help me get more Pain Resonance hooks. Now the reasons I'd suggest these perks instead of others is because if you happen to down a survivor close to a 3-gen, what's going to happen is Jolt's going to go off, passively regressing all three at the same time, and if not, you're going to be able to hear them and know that somebody was on them. That way you hold on to a 3-gen a bit longer. Pain Resonance, that way if you do down somebody close to a Pain Resonance hook, you get them put up and it slows down the farthest progress gen, once again allowing you not only to hold on to a 3-gen a lot better, but also slows down the game a little bit. Fearmonger, that way you can combat any exhaustion perks right off of a generator, and that way they can't make it far away from you, resulting in very quick downs. And finally, Iron Grasp. This here happens to just be like a plug-in perk. I personally used it that way to get more Pain Resonance hooks, but you could swap it out for pretty much anything you'd like to play with. Now let's move on to our tips. The first step, do not run Corrupt Intervention. Tip number 2, trap tiles that cannot be used up. Things like 2-window loops, Killer Shack, and Cow Tree. The reason for this is because you can break pallets. So if you put a trap down in a pallet, yeah, they'll run you to it and you might get one use out of that trap, but more likely than not they won't run back that way, in which case your trap's sitting in one spot being useless. Tip number 3, reset traps often to get quick downs. Most of the time I like to reset my traps as soon as I get done hooking somebody, because by that time you reset traps, more likely than not they'll already have that person taken off the hook, in either which case you could try to get somebody out of the game early or go for somebody else by the hook. Tip number 4. This tip only pertains to 3-gen trappers. Do not be afraid to drop chase and go back and protect your 3-gen. Most of the time, all it takes is one little mess up, and you're going to end up losing your 3-gen, and all 4 people get out. Tip number 5. Iridescent add-ons are tremendously helpful, but keep in mind they are not necessary to win. Tip number 6. Try not to spread your traps too far apart. The reason for this is you want most of your pressure to be in one general area. It's a lot easier to get a survivor to screw up and go into one of your traps if there's a lot in the same area. But if they're spread really far apart, more likely than not you can't push them in the exact area that you want them to go to in order to get into one of your traps. Tip number 7. This doesn't always work, but I do like to do it on most maps. Try to place one obvious trap, like directly on top of a generator, and then one not so obvious trap, like behind, not necessarily behind a pallet, but in a trash loop or somewhere along those lines. That way they're focused too much on trying to get rid of that obvious trap, and if you happen to come up and push them, they're not going to expect the not so obvious trap. Tip number 8. Ignore and if at all possible avoid all survivors while you're in your setup. The reason for this is if you happen to run into a survivor that has half of a brain, they're going to try to follow you around and set off your traps. Even if you're running the Bloody Coil add-on, they're going to get hurt and then still proceed to follow you around and snap your traps, ultimately making you just a M1 killer. Tip number 9. I know this is going to make survivor mains mad, but try to get one person out of the game as quickly as possible. Trapper is a very slow, very late game type of killer. So if you can get one person out, it'll make the game a whole lot easier. And I'm not saying be toxic about it, and I'm definitely not saying you need to tunnel really, really hard. Just if you have the opportunity, go for that person out. Tip number 10, the last tip, and I would say probably one of the most important tips. Once you get set up, survivors will end up having to come to you, regardless of what you do. So don't be afraid to just leave. Let them come to you. And that's all I have for this tips and tricks video. I hope it helps. Make sure to stay tuned for when rank reset hits, because I will be top ranking the Wraith. That's all I have for this video, so I'll see you in the next one.